Bob Marley is my father. I don't have to come out and say that. But my name Fabian Marley, if I try to go and change it back, it will put me in problem.
Okay, bear with me. You know Bob Marley was a legend, right? But when someone swoops in, claiming to be his secret son, and Rita Marley responds like she just smelled acid on the mic, you've got to pay attention. And trust me, Rita's reaction was unforgettable. Recapping the reggae legend's legacy. Before we dive into Fabian and Rita's reaction, we need to talk about why this story matters so much. You can't understand the weight of Fabian's claim until you understand the size of Bob Marley's shadow. And believe me, it's not just big, it's global. Bob Marley wasn't just a guy with a guitar and a good voice. He was the face of reggae music and a cultural icon who brought Jamaica's sound to the entire world. When people think of reggae, 9 times out of 10, they picture Marley's smiling face and those famous dreadlocks. His songs weren't just about music, they were about freedom, love, and resistance. Tracks like One Love, No Woman, No Cry, and Redemption Song aren't just songs, they're movements bottled up into 3-minute anthems. And here's the thing, Marley wasn't only singing about peace and love in some vague, hippie way. He tied those messages to real struggles. He sang about poverty, oppression, and the fight for justice. That's why his music hit so hard. You didn't have to be Jamaican to feel it. Whether you were in Africa, Europe, the US, or a tiny island somewhere, Bob's music spoke to you. By the time he passed away in 1981, Bob Marley was a legend at just 36 years old. And unlike many musicians who fade over time, his reputation only grew. Today, you'll see his face on t-shirts, posters, and flags around the world. His albums still sell like crazy, and every generation keeps rediscovering him. He's one of those rare artists who never goes out of style. Now, let's talk about legacy. Bob didn't just leave behind a discography, he left behind a family. Several of his children, like Ziggy, Stephen, and Damien, have carried the torch in music. They've won Grammys, toured the world, and continued spreading reggae. Others, like Cedella, have gone into business and philanthropy. In short, the Marley family isn't just famous, they're a dynasty. That's what makes Fabian's claim so dramatic. The Marley family tree is already full of well-known names, and they've been very protective about who gets included in that circle. Bob's legacy isn't just sentimental, it's also financial. We're talking about an estate that earns millions each year through music royalties, merchandise, and licensing. The Marley brand is one of the most profitable music estates in the world. So, when someone steps up decades later saying, "Hey, I'm Bob's son too," that's not just a personal revelation. That's a direct hit to the heart of the Marley Empire. It threatens the integrity of the legacy, the family's identity, and, let's be real, the money. And this is where Rita Marley comes in. As Bob's widow, she has spent decades guarding that legacy. She's not just the keeper of his memory, she's the gatekeeper of his name. She knows the power of Bob's reputation, and she knows how many people want a piece of it. That's why, when Fabian made his claim, Rita's reaction wasn't just personal, it was protective. To understand why she went nuts, as people say, you have to first understand that to Rita, Bob Marley's legacy is sacred, and she was never going to let someone walk in and casually rewrite history without a fight. Who is Rita Marley? If Bob Marley is the king of reggae, then Rita Marley is the queen who kept the crown polished long after the music stopped. But before she became the widow who guarded his legacy with the ferocity of a lioness, she was a powerhouse in her own right. Rita was born Alpharetta Anderson in 1946, and while some reports say she was born in Cuba, she was raised in Kingston, Jamaica. Her childhood wasn't exactly silver spoons and smooth sailing. Like many Jamaicans at the time, she grew up in tough conditions, and music became both her escape and her calling. She started out as a singer, joining girl groups and developing her voice in Kingston's bustling music scene. By the 1960s, Rita was performing with a group called the Solettes, who worked with a young Bob Marley when he was just starting out with the Wailers. This was where their personal and professional lives first collided. Rita's voice, strong and soulful, quickly became part of Bob's world. When the Wailers needed backup singers, Rita and 2 other women, Marcia Griffiths and Judy Mowat, stepped in, forming the legendary trio the I-Threes. Together, they would back Bob Marley and the Wailers on some of the most iconic reggae songs ever recorded. But here's the thing. Rita wasn't just in the background. She had her own solo career, releasing albums and carrying her own message through music. She was and is a believer in Rastafari, just like Bob, and she embodied that faith in everything she did. That spiritual alignment between them became the glue that held their marriage together, even when life threw them curveballs. And let's not sugarcoat it, life threw some big curveballs. Bob Marley wasn't exactly a model husband when it came to fidelity. He had multiple relationships and fathered children outside of his marriage to Rita. She knew this, and it wasn't easy, but she stayed by his side, raising her own children as well as Bob's, creating one large, complicated, but united family. When Bob died in 1981, Rita was only in her mid-30s. She could have faded into the background, remarried, or just lived quietly. Instead, she stepped into the spotlight as the protector of Bob's music image and legacy. She became the matriarch of the Marley dynasty. Rita wasn't just Bob Marley's widow. She was a businesswoman, a musician, and the person responsible for ensuring that the Marley name stayed powerful and respected. She turned the Marley home in Kingston, known as 56 Hope Road, into the Bob Marley Museum, which remains one of Jamaica's most visited cultural sites. She kept the family organized and helped guide the careers of Bob's children, especially Ziggy and Stephen, as they took reggae into a new era. Without Rita, it's hard to say if the Marley family would have become the global force they are today. Rita is also deeply philanthropic. She started the Rita Marley Foundation, which focuses on improving the lives of people in Ghana, Jamaica, and beyond. She even spent significant time living in Ghana, embracing Africa not just as the spiritual homeland of Rastafari, but as her personal home. So, when Fabian Marley stepped forward with his claim, it wasn't just some random rumor to her. Rita had been the rock holding everything together for decades. She knew the value of Bob's legacy, both emotionally and financially. To her, this wasn't just about one man saying he was Bob's son. This was about protecting the Marley family, the empire she had helped maintain, and the sacred memory of her husband. And that's why Rita's reaction hit so hard. She wasn't reacting as a jealous widow or a bitter woman. She was responding as the matriarch, the guardian, the person who had dedicated her entire adult life to making sure Bob Marley's name remained untouchable. When you understand who Rita Marley is, her sharp rejection of Fabian makes perfect sense. She wasn't just protecting the past, she was defending the future. Here comes Fabian. All right, now it's time to introduce the man at the center of all this drama, Fabian Marley. He's not just a random name popping up out of nowhere. He's a musician, he's Jamaican, and he's been working in the reggae scene for years. But then, in classic Here Comes Trouble style, he steps forward claiming something explosive, that he's one of Bob Marley's children. Let's get some context. Fabian was born in 1968 in Kingston, Jamaica. Music was in his blood, or at least it ended up there. He learned to play multiple instruments, including piano, guitar, drums, and harmonica, and started performing with local bands like Sounds of Rainbow. He also worked in Tough Gong Studios, the very place where Bob Marley recorded some of his greatest hits. That's right, Fabian was literally walking the halls where history was made. So, yes, he had legitimate musical chops. You could argue he was well positioned to make a name for himself even without claiming Marley heritage. But here's where things get sticky. Fabian started telling people he was Bob Marley's son. He said he had felt a connection to Bob for years, and that stories from his mother hinted at this lineage. Suddenly, his musical talent became entangled with questions about family and legacy. And timing? Let's just say it wasn't ideal. Fabian didn't reveal this in the late 70s or early 80s when Bob was alive. He didn't quietly approach the family decades ago. No, he went public much later, after Bob had passed, after the Marley estate had been established, and after the Marley children were well known in their own right. It was like showing up to a family reunion decades late and insisting you belong there. Fabian also started branding himself as a Marley. He used the name, leaned into the connection in interviews, and subtly suggested he was carrying on Bob's legacy. Now, if you're thinking, well, maybe he really believed it, fair. But to the Marley family, and especially Rita, it felt opportunistic. It looked like someone trying to cash in on the most famous surname in reggae. The public reaction was immediate. Fans were curious. Social media buzzed with speculation. Could this be true? People asked. Music journalists ran interviews and articles exploring Fabian's claims. Meanwhile, the Marley estate and Rita Marley remained tight-lipped until the right moment. And let's not forget, Fabian didn't just appear out of the blue. He had connections in the music industry, knew the studios, and had the talent to make people listen. His claim added an extra layer of intrigue. People weren't just asking if he was Bob's son, they were asking whether he was the next big Marley to watch. But behind the scenes, the family was already skeptical. Stories passed down through generations, combined with the fact that Bob's life was well documented, made Fabian's timing suspicious. It wasn't just about proving a biological connection, it was about protecting a legacy that took decades to build. And as the world waited for an answer, Rita Marley prepared to step in and make one thing crystal clear. She would not let anyone rewrite history on her watch. So, Fabian Marley entered the story as a musician, a potential heir, and, depending on your point of view, a headline grabber. His claim set the stage for one of the most talked about moments in modern Marley family history. And what happened next? Let's just say Rita didn't hold back. And the reaction went down in family lore as the moment she truly went nuts. Poor timing? Timing is everything in stories like this, and Fabian Marley could not have picked a more complicated moment to step into the spotlight. He didn't make his claims in the 1980s, when Bob Marley was still alive and the family was dealing with grief. He didn't even approach the Marley family quietly in the years following Bob's death. No, Fabian waited decades before announcing to the world that he was claiming to be Bob's son, and that timing made all the difference. By the time Fabian went public, the Marley legacy was no longer just about music. It was a global brand. Bob Marley had become an icon, his image and songs reaching every corner of the world. The Marley estate had grown into a structured organization, complete with legal teams, royalties, and family members managing Bob's name. The children, like Ziggy, Stephen, and Damien, were established musicians, recognized internationally. Every new claim of kinship now carried weight beyond simple family gossip. It had legal, financial, and public implications. Fabian's timing raised immediate questions. People naturally wondered why he waited so long. If he truly was Bob's son, why reveal it only now, decades after Bob passed away? Why not connect with the family quietly first? The delay made it look less like a heartfelt revelation and more like a calculated move to attract attention. And from the family's perspective, especially Rita Marley, the timing was suspicious. She had spent years protecting Bob's legacy from people trying to profit off his name. She had dealt with unauthorized biographies, misleading media reports, and even imposters trying to ride the Marley name. In her eyes, Fabian's sudden claim wasn't just about truth, it was about timing and intent. The long delay, combined with public announcements, triggered immediate skepticism. Fabian himself claimed that his mother had told him stories suggesting he was Bob's son. He explained that the timing wasn't about opportunism, but about needing the right moment to go public. However, in high-profile cases like this, perception is everything. Waiting decades and then going public in interviews with the press can come across as opportunistic, even if your intentions are genuine. The media loved the timing. Headlines thrived on drama. Man claims reggae legend is his father decades later. Social media buzzed. Fans debated whether this was legitimate or just another tabloid story. Every day, new articles and opinion pieces appeared, questioning both Fabian's claim and his timing. And while public curiosity grew, the Marley family maintained a controlled silence, letting the story unfold while assessing the next move. Ultimately, the timing of Fabian's claim added fuel to the fire. It created tension between him, the family, and the public. By waiting years to announce it, he put himself in a position where his story had to be scrutinized, examined, and verified. Rita Marley, as always, was ready to respond, knowing that timing could not override the truth, nor could it undermine decades of carefully protected legacy. So, Fabian Marley's entrance into the public eye wasn't just dramatic because of the claim itself. It was dramatic because of when he chose to make it. Timing turned what might have been a minor family discussion into a worldwide talking point, setting the stage for the legendary reaction that would follow. And as we'll see next, the backstory only added more layers to this complicated family saga. A little backstory. Before diving into the claims and drama, it's important to understand who Fabian Marley really is. Because while the story of someone claiming to be Bob Marley's son grabs headlines, the reality is a bit more layered. Fabian isn't a random stranger showing up out of nowhere. He's a musician with a background rooted in Jamaican music, and he spent decades trying to find his own place in the world of reggae. Fabian was born in 1968 in Kingston, Jamaica. From a young age, music seemed to follow him around. He picked up instruments, piano, guitar, drums, and harmonica, and quickly demonstrated talent that many musicians spend years developing. Fabian wasn't just dabbling, he was serious about music, and he worked hard to establish himself in the local scene. Over the years, Fabian performed with several bands, including Sounds of Rainbow and the Shepherds. These were not obscure groups. In Kingston, they had recognition, and Fabian was building credibility as a serious musician. He also spent time at Tuff Gong Studios, which is iconic in the reggae world as Bob Marley's recording studio. Fabian's connection to Tuff Gong gave him an inside view of the music industry and tied him to the Marley legacy long before his paternity claim. But while his musical career was developing, Fabian's life was complicated. He grew up hearing stories from his mother that suggested he might be connected to Bob Marley, and these stories stuck with him. Whether these stories were based on truth, misunderstanding, or embellishment, Fabian carried them into adulthood, shaping both his personal identity and professional ambitions. Over time, Fabian began leaning into the Marley connection more openly. He started calling himself Fabian Marley, performing under that name, and even producing music that paid homage to Bob's style. It's easy to see why some people would be drawn to him as a Marley heir. He had talent, he had knowledge of the industry, and he had a compelling story that connected him to one of the most famous musicians of all time. However, from the perspective of the Marley family, Fabian's story was more complicated. While he had legitimate musical experience, he didn't have formal recognition as Bob's child. The Marley name had been carefully protected for decades, and any claim to that legacy was subject to scrutiny. To the family, Fabian's background, while impressive in some ways, didn't automatically earn him a place in the Marley lineage. Fabian's backstory also highlights an important point about legacy and identity. Growing up in Jamaica, surrounded by the sound of Bob Marley's music and the reverence the world had for him, Fabian naturally felt a connection. But family legacy isn't just about feelings. It's about verification, history, and acknowledgement by those who are part of the family. So, while the public saw a dramatic claim and a story that could sell headlines, Fabian Marley's backstory paints a more nuanced picture. He was a musician with talent, ambition, and a personal belief in his connection to Bob Marley. But ambition and belief alone don't make someone part of a family, and this distinction would become central when Rita Marley entered the scene to set the record straight. Fabian's background explains why he had confidence in his claim and why he felt entitled to go public. It also explains why the Marley family, particularly Rita, was wary. She had spent decades maintaining the integrity of Bob's legacy and had seen countless attempts by outsiders to attach themselves to his name. Fabian's backstory wasn't just a prelude, it was the foundation for the confrontation that was about to unfold. Going public. Now things start to get really interesting. Fabian Marley, armed with his talent, his personal conviction, and his connection to the Marley music scene, made the bold move to go public with his claim. And let's be honest, it was dramatic, like the kind of headline that makes reggae fans everywhere do a double take. Fabian didn't just quietly tell the family. He went to the press, did interviews, and made statements that the world could see. He claimed he was Bob Marley's son, that he had always felt a deep connection to Bob, and that his mother had shared stories hinting at this relationship. He framed himself as someone with both musical talent and a spiritual link to one of the world's most famous musicians. From a media standpoint, this was gold. It wasn't just a story about family drama, it was about legacy, fame, and intrigue. Headlines popped up worldwide. Man claims reggae legend as father, and Bob Marley's forgotten son speaks out. Fans started discussing it in forums, on social media, and in reggae circles. Questions flooded in. Could this really be true? Why now? What does this mean for the Marley legacy? The public's fascination with celebrity families isn't surprising. People love to imagine the secret child scenario. It's a story we've seen in tabloids countless times. But the stakes here were higher than a normal celebrity story. Bob Marley's legacy isn't just fame. its culture, music, and spiritual influence. Anyone claiming to be part of that family, especially publicly, automatically becomes a figure of attention and scrutiny. Meanwhile, the Marley family, especially Rita, was quietly assessing the situation. Publicly, they didn't jump in immediately, but behind the scenes, Rita was reportedly evaluating Fabian's claims and preparing to respond. She knew that while the public might be curious and even sympathetic, protecting the family name and Bob Marley's legacy was non-negotiable. Fabian's strategy also included building a persona as the spiritual heir to Bob Marley. In interviews, he positioned himself as someone carrying Bob's message forward through both music and Rastafari principles. He leaned on the emotional side of the story, his connection to Bob, the longing he felt for a father figure, and his dedication to the music. It was compelling, especially to people who didn't know the Marley family intimately. However, this public approach came with risks. Once a claim goes public, it opens the floodgates for scrutiny, investigation, and, of course, pushback from the family. And pushback was exactly what Fabian got, in a way that would become legendary. Rita Marley wasn't about to let someone casually insert themselves into the family story without verification. She knew how damaging misinformation could be, especially when it involved the family name, public perception, and decades of carefully maintained legacy. Fabian's public claim was the moment everything escalated. It wasn't just a personal statement anymore. It became a headline story, a talking point, and a challenge to the Marley estate. And as often happens in these situations, when a claim threatens a family's legacy, the matriarch steps in. And Rita Marley, she was ready. So, when Fabian went public, the stage was set for a confrontation. Fans were watching, the media was buzzing, and the Marley family was preparing to respond. This wasn't just another celebrity rumor, it was a direct test of legacy, truth, and family loyalty. And when Rita finally spoke, the world saw exactly why she's known for her unwavering protection of Bob Marley's name. Rita's reaction. Now we get to the part that everyone was waiting for, Rita Marley's reaction. And let's just say, she did not hold back. When Fabian Marley went public claiming to be Bob Marley's son, Rita wasn't polite, she wasn't subtle, and she certainly wasn't going to let this slide. Her response was fierce, direct, and unmistakable, a true matriarch protecting her legacy. Rita Marley has always been someone who commands respect. She's Bob's widow, yes, but she's also a singer, a philanthropist, and the person who has been managing the Marley family's legacy for decades. She knows the ins and outs of the music industry, she understands the value of the Marley name, and she has experience handling claims, rumors, and opportunists. So, when Fabian made his declaration, Rita's reaction wasn't personal in the sense of jealousy. It was professional, protective, and absolutely necessary. In interviews, she made it clear that Fabian was not Bob Marley's son. There was no ambiguity, no waffling, and certainly no sugarcoating. Rita stated that Fabian had no biological connection to Bob, and she expressed her frustration at the public spectacle. From her perspective, it wasn't just about one man making a claim. It was about the potential damage to decades of hard-earned reputation and the integrity of the Marley family. Her reaction has been described as going nuts by some media outlets. But if you really break it down, it wasn't uncontrolled anger. It was righteous fury. Imagine dedicating your adult life to maintaining the name, music, and values of one of the most famous artists in the world, only to have someone step forward with a claim that could disrupt everything. Rita's response was firm, protective, and decisive. She wasn't interested in public debate, she was setting the record straight. Fans noticed her intensity, and many supported her stance. People who followed the Marley family understand that Rita's word carries weight. When she spoke, she wasn't just defending her late husband. She was defending a family, a brand, and a legacy that has cultural and spiritual significance far beyond the music. Her reaction wasn't just about denial, it was a declaration that the Marley family would not be compromised. And there's another layer here. Rita's reaction also sent a clear message to the public and the media. Celebrity claims like Fabian's can gain traction quickly, but when the family responds decisively, it curbs misinformation and speculation. Rita's approach balanced authority with clarity, ensuring that the truth was front and center. It's also worth noting that Rita's response wasn't purely reactionary. She has been thoughtful about protecting the Marley estate for decades. Her actions in this situation were consistent with her history, measured, strategic, and deeply rooted in her commitment to the family. Going nuts in the media sense doesn't mean chaos. It means she was assertive, loud enough to be heard, and unwavering in her position. In short, Rita Marley's reaction was iconic in its own right. She proved that the guardian of Bob Marley's legacy doesn't take claims lightly. She defended the family, upheld the truth as she knows it, and reminded the world that when it comes to the Marley name, you do not play around. And with that foundation, the next chapter, DNA tests and the fallout, was ready to unfold. The DNA test drama. After Rita's strong denial, the next logical question was, well, let's test it. If Fabian was truly Bob's son, DNA would settle the debate once and for all. Reports say Fabian agreed to undergo testing, hoping it would prove his case. The Marley family, though, wasn't exactly lining up to cooperate. From their point of view, why entertain claims that already felt baseless? Still, pressure mounted. Fans wanted answers, the media wanted closure, and Fabian needed that test to keep his claim alive. Eventually, Fabian's DNA results were released, and they didn't match Bob Marley's children. In other words, science backed up Rita's sharp instincts. Fabian wasn't Bob's son. The tests shut the door on his claim, at least officially, but here's the kicker. Fabian didn't drop the issue right away. He continued making music, still drawing on reggae's roots and Bob's influence. Even after the DNA test, some fans sympathized, saying Fabian believed the story he grew up with and that he wasn't just lying for fame. But the Marley family had made their position clear, and Rita especially wasn't interested in reopening the case. The DNA chapter sealed the story for most people. It proved that Fabian wasn't part of the Marley bloodline. Rita's fiery reaction, paired with the scientific results, made it crystal clear. Bob's legacy was not up for grabs. The bigger picture. So, what do we take away from this saga? Beyond the family drama and headlines, this was about the power of a name. The Marley legacy is more than music, it's cultural currency. People look at Bob Marley as a prophet, a hero, a symbol of unity. And Rita Marley knows that protecting that image means protecting the family line. Fabian's story highlights the risks of being tied to someone as famous as Bob. There will always be people stepping up, claiming connection, hoping to share the spotlight. Sometimes those claims might be true. Bob did have multiple children outside his marriage, but other times they're opportunistic, and the family has to sort through it all. Rita's reaction shows just how fiercely she guards her husband's name. To her, every false claim weakens the truth of Bob's life and legacy. She's spent decades ensuring that his story remains authentic and respected. And when Fabian tried to wedge himself in, she went nuts, not because she lost control, but because she refused to let anyone rewrite her family's story. The bigger picture is this: celebrity legacies aren't just personal, they're public property in many ways. And for families like the Marleys, every claim has ripple effects. Rita Marley made it clear that only the truth has a place in that legacy. So, there you have it. When Fabian Marley claimed to be Bob Marley's son, Rita Marley didn't just roll her eyes, she went full force, rejecting the claim and protecting her husband's name with everything she had. DNA tests later backed her up, but honestly, Rita had called it from the start. What do you think? Was Fabian genuinely misled by stories he grew up with, or was this all about attention? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if you learned something new, and subscribe for more deep dives into celebrity history and drama. Because trust me, there's always another story waiting to blow your mind.